Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Sean Hyson. So here's a name that I've been hearing echoed through the halls of the fitness industry for a long time. And you and I have worked together, but before that, I would hear about you. You're a certified strength and conditioning specialist. You're an author. You worked as the editor-in-chief for Onnit, where I wrote for you. So that was great. And you've been the training director for Men's Fitness and Muscle Fitness magazine. So pretty serious resume. And now you're working with Noble, the shoes. One of my clients comes in and I see the Noble shoes and I always think about this. So it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Okay. So given the fact that you've been a very high level, bird's eye view of the industry, content, writing for so long, how has the way people consume fitness media changed recently, the last 5, 10 years?
Well, obviously now video is getting the emphasis. Any kind of written content that you want to get eyeballs on today, I think has to have a video component. So what I was doing on it in my my last few years there, and what I'm doing now with Noble is we're producing a lot of short video to go along with the articles, and that video can then be spliced up for social media content and used in so many other ways. But yeah, I mean, you and I think are about the same age. I think when we came up, it was all about reading the fitness magazines, the weird publications. That was how you learned about this stuff, because there really wasn't a lot else out there, and what was online at the time was dubious at best. Not that that's changed at all, but I mean, it's a little bit better now. There's more resources available now. So yeah, things have changed a lot from being kind of a purely picture and word industry to now you've got moving video, and there's so many other ways to consume this media. And it's for the better for the most part. I mean, it's been challenging for my career as a writer, but when you're talking about learning exercises and trying to understand how this stuff affects your body, being able to see it in motion is so important.
And it makes me think, I've talked about this in a few places, how the traditional gatekeepers of who gets to be a fitness authority have changed. So, and again, for the listeners who are not fitness professionals themselves, you guys will see this because now you see social media, right? Social media basically took away pretty much the gatekeeping. You can find someone who is very savvy on video, knows how to edit, quick cuts, charismatic, good looking, may or may not be relevant, right? That's been a thing, since the early stages of social media, especially like picture-based Instagram in its earlier days. That was a big deal. But someone does not need to have educational credentials, which, I mean, I don't like beating on that drum, because I also think that in the fitness industry, we sometimes get coaches who cry about needing more regulation. And I know lots of great people who don't necessarily have deep educational backgrounds. And I usually find that the fitness professionals who are complaining about regulation are just mad because they haven't had much success with any sort of media, social media, and they feel entitled to the followers and the clients that they think the influencers are getting. So I find it's a bit of more like an entitled wine narrative. But back to the point, I came through my career early on, before I was lifting, just like you said. I was reading Muscle Fitness. I was reading the other magazines, right? And so the people you saw in that who were writing for it, the people who were getting featured, the bodybuilders, et cetera, were some of the more visible ones. And then there's T-Nation, bodybuilding.com. So most of the well-known figures of the industry were writing for these things, and they were platformed by these gatekeepers. Whereas now you can bypass all that, and you can gain a large following if you're very good with video. So what do you want the end user to pay attention to when they're digging into these resources?
You're right. You can bypass the gatekeeper. I do think, though, that the cream tends to rise to the top, and that some of the better influencers in our field are also the most educated and experienced people out there. So as far as for the users out there, people just getting into this stuff, I think you have to apply common sense. Whoever you follow, whoever you're going to take advice from, make sure they have some kind of a credential, at least a certification, if not a PhD, at least some. If neither of those, at least like several years of experience in the field. Make sure they have, some bylines and articles going back a ways, or they've been consulted and appeared in other shows like yours elsewhere in the past. Make sure they train real people, that they've got a clientele of actual human beings with before and after photos they can point to establish some credibility. I think where you really get in trouble is these these TikTokers who are in their early 20s. who just, look the part, whether it's because they're genetic freaks or maybe they're just animals in the gym, or maybe they're on steroids too, or all the above. Those are the guys that I think are the most dangerous in this industry, is the people who are really, they're obviously too young to have any real experience and education. And they're just getting by on their looks and their, like you said, the charisma and just the way they package themselves. So yeah, do your diligence and look into people to take advice from who have some kind of a track record.
This episode is brought to you by Macros First. I've always struggled with nutrition tracking apps, even the slightest hassle or friction, and it breaks my habit. That changed with Macros First. When I tried it, I told my friend, the founder, Jacob, quote, this is, well, let's just call it a certain other app on steroids. It's the easiest app to use, and it has a free barcode scanner, which if you use tracking apps, you know this is a really big deal. I recommend Macros First to all my clients and friends, and even had them sponsor my 2024 conference. Here's an example of feature that I love. The verified food database. Remember using other apps and searching for a food only to find 10 to 50 similar options with different macros, not knowing which one to pick? This kind of friction is the shit that made me quit tracking altogether. Macros First, every single food item in the database, over 3 million of them, is human verified. No junk entries, so you can trust the numbers. Plus, that free barcode scanner makes logging faster. And if the barcode doesn't turn anything up, just point your camera at the nutrition label and Macros First will extract all the nutrition info instantly. All this just makes tracking easier. Macros First is free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. And if you use the code Andrew, all caps, my first name, you'll get an extended free trial of Macros First Premium. That unlocks a bunch of features that make tracking way easier and faster.
Are there any things that you tend to find show up with people who, like, I know that person doesn't actually train people when they give this kind of advice?
Yeah, I mean, I spent many years, my early part of my career, kind of vetting strength coaches. And who was I to do that? I had a certification, but I didn't have a lot of years of training people in the gyms. But I get to meet a lot of people, strength and conditioning coaches and other trainers through the magazines. And, the common denominators of what really works and who knows what they're talking about comes through pretty quickly. People who don't go in for extremes and don't recommend extremes are the ones who are the most trustworthy. Somebody comes out and says, I'm a kettlebell guy, or I'm only about barbells and that's all that I do. And you've got to do this many reps and it's always to failure. Anything like that. And anybody who uses terms like always or never is already suspect in my book. People who really train people like yourself, people who are distinguished professionals, they'll see nuance in all these things and they'll say, well, it depends. And give me, what's the article about, or what's the kind of content we want to produce and for what audience, and, what are the key points you want to get across? And I will tailor my answers for that. That's what you have to think about.
This episode is brought to you by Just Bite Me Meals. I work long days and I won't compromise my client experience or sacrifice my workout, sleep, or nutrition. So I needed a quality and reliable meal prep service so I could save time on cooking and shopping and have more time for the stuff that matters. Net out the cost of groceries and the service isn't as much as you might think, and regular impulsive food delivery apps, eating out, that costs way more anyway. I get more meal variety and less dishes to clean, and I've been referring clients to Just Bite Me Meals for a long time, and I recently started ordering myself. Food is great. The beef brisket tacos are my favorite so far, and there's a lot of menu choice. Your calories and macros are listed. The portions are great. You can order custom meals. They deliver to your door, or you can pick up from their storefront. And I'm sorry to listeners outside of Alberta, but Just Bite Me Meals is currently just in Edmonton, Calgary, Grand Prairie, and Fort McMurray. Ordering from Just Bite Me Meals made my life easier instantly. And you can get 10% off on all your orders using my code, Andrew Coates Fitness, all caps, on their website. That's Andrew Coates Fitness, all capitals, or go to the link and the code in the show notes.
I always think about this, is a very specific example, but if someone's putting supersets in a program with no consideration for, can you actually do that superset in a gym with the equipment that, can be done near each other, right? It's like, okay, 2 dumbbell exercises supersetted, probably okay. But do we have, some machine supersetted with some cable thing? It's like, sounds great on paper, completely impractical in the gym unless you're going to just violate etiquette, running back and forth, which is going to piss everyone off and be frustrating for the client.
Yeah, another thing with that is you look at and I've looked at so many different trainers programs over the years. look at how many reps they assign and the rest periods for them and how many sets, and like do the math in your head. Think about how long it's going to take. You'll see programs where they have like, supersets, like you said, that if you really did it the way it's written, would go on for like 10 or 15 minutes. Like it's a big chunk of the workout that you're devoting to, what is often cases like, two kind of minimal assistance exercises. And that just screams inexperience right away. I mean, people who really train people, they know you can get the job done very quickly with few exercises.
So how would you incentivize or suggest to people to go back and dig into the long form resources like articles? And I mean, we could talk about long form YouTube. Certainly people listening to this podcast already biased towards long form audio, but how do you get people to go back into the articles? And are the articles as good now as they were in the days where they were more popular?
I'm not sure that you do have to go back. I hate to say it, but I do think that there are some influencers out there today, some, Instagrammers who are putting out better content that we've seen in textbooks, over the years. They're really, cutting to the heart of things. They've figured out how to dismiss the fluff and get to what really works and get past a lot of the psychology or the terminology, the jargon, and that's not a bad thing. It's more about looking for the right resources, like I said before, finding people who have the right track record than it is for looking for a specific kind of content.
And I've noticed that there's definitely some social media posts that I know, with the amount of video editing that went in, the research, et cetera, that those people put probably the same amount of time that it would have taken someone to write a T Nation article 15 years ago. But it's in a social media post. And on one hand, on the fitness professional side, I'm kind of thinking, oh my God, here's all this effort that goes into a post that might not hit on the algorithm and might disappear pretty quickly. And for sure isn't necessarily as evergreen and searchable. That's a thing. But on the balance, what have I noticed in gyms? And a trend for sure is I'm seeing way more people knowing what they're doing. I'm seeing way more younger lifters who know what they're doing. I'm seeing way more women who know what they're doing. I like to make fun of the old guys. They're still doing the same bullshit that old guys have always done. And I notice as I get older, I gravitate a little bit more to machines. I used to kind of chuckle at the old guys. I'm like, you need to use free weights. I talked about this recently on an episode with Dr. Pack. And it's like, no, and the research has kind of caught up with this, that the machines are actually great for building muscle and free weights are not superior. In your view, are there any fitness trends in fitness or media that have your attention that are, either causes for concern or stuff that you're actually really excited about? And it sounds to me like you've been very positive about the good creators sharing good information.
Yeah, as far as causes for concern, I would say there's more of that on the nutrition front than there is in fitness and training. I mean, we still have this carnivore diet trend and the extreme low carb guys, and people who are on the RFK bandwagon of finding foods and ingredients and preservatives to demonize and blame for all their problems. I'm not saying there's not virtue and merit to a lot of their arguments, but I think the biggest problem today is we're oversimplifying things and missing the big picture. There's too much of demonizing certain foods and telling people they have to be extreme again. Cut out all carbs, cut out sugar. Avoid this, avoid that. And rather than just seeing the bigger issue, which is that the reason obesity is so rampant today primarily is because people are moving less and eating more than they ever have in history. It's not because of this one thing in our foods, and if we just got rid of that, we'd all be healthier. That's this mountains and mountains of research to point to that. So that's on the nutrition side. In training, yeah, I agree with what you said. I see a lot of young people today who are squatting much better than they did 25 years ago when you and I started. They're asking good questions. Their training is much more multifactorial. There's much more cross training. There aren't as many disparate camps as there were back when we started, where you were just a powerlifter, West Side guy, or just a bodybuilder. I think CrossFit is a lot to integrate all of that. So that's the good of it. But then there's kind of it's one thing or the other. It's either people who are educating themselves with social media and they're figuring out the right thing, and there's other people who have been just swamped with too much information and they're applying all of it, everything, everywhere, all at once, and their form is all over the place because they're trying to do too many things. So yeah, this is the catch-22, is there's too much of a good thing. Too much information can be hazardous.
And we see people getting results with wildly different approaches to intensity, volume of work, methodologies. And yet, again, we are seeing pretty good results across the board. Is the common denominator the fact that people are just working pretty hard, and relatively smart and pretty hard, and Do you think that a lot of the minutia of the different ways that people brand around training ideologies, do you think that stuff's not as important as people make it out to be?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, I remember I interviewed a bodybuilding coach years ago about, when I was young and learning about training and periodization and, all the sophisticated kind of programming that was there was starting to be research on. And I remember saying, how could Arnold and Franco and all those guys back in the day, how they get such great results when they didn't really know anything, compared to what we know now with the research. And I remember the guy said to me, well, they knew how to work hard. And that's really it. If you work your ass off and you're really consistent, I think you're going to see good results over a long enough timeline. Now, there's all kinds of, ways to apply logic and intelligence to speed things along and help you avoid pitfalls along the way. But if you forget nothing else, with training, it's about progressive overload. Figure out a way to get stronger consistently over time. And that is going to build muscle and strength and help you keep your body fat down. And with nutrition, as we were saying before, try to keep things moderate, keep your calories under control, high protein, whole foods. If you cover those bases, you're pretty well set.
What about the cyclical trends of old things becoming new, just rebranded? I mean, keto is really just rebranded low carb from, go back to the 80s. We're definitely seeing a big resurgence in people talking about low volume training being ideal for muscle hypertrophy, which is really just rebranded Mike Mentzer type stuff and Dorian Yates. So, yeah, why does this happen?
Well, I mean, new generations are coming up, right? And they don't know remember what low carb was the first time around or the fifth time around. So they're discovering it for the first time. And that's these influencers, they can't just stick to one philosophy. You can't ride that out for your whole career. You have to keep reinventing yourself. Unfortunately, stay on top of the algorithms and keep, new members coming in and signing up for your stuff. So it's to their advantage to keep hopping on the new bandwagons as they come around again. So that's why I'm saying, look at guys who have been in it for a long time, guys and gals who, have had a long career in this business. Yeah, they probably jumped on different trends here and there, but what they're going to come around to, what they're going to ultimately say is the more moderate approach. They're going to recommend that most of the time to most people.
What about the flip side? The people who've been around a long time and, in often cases branded around an ideology or even wrote the books on it and have not changed with more nuanced and shifting understanding of the evidence. And then they just stay rigidly in a camp.
Well, I think they're only hurting themselves. There are going to be people who just find one horse and stick with it for the rest of their lives, and they never really seem to get injured, and they do okay. But I think those people are going to be the minority, and in for most cases, people will get hurt or at least be very limited in what they can accomplish with training if they're so dogmatic and rigid and just following one philosophy.
And I guess people could be punished either way, because if you're seen, it's almost like politicians, and I'll never talk about politics on here, but a politician who flip-flops, the person who changes belief systems is accused of, flip-flopping and just changing their beliefs. Whereas, again, the person who digs their heels in a little too hard is accused of not shifting with evolving evidence.
Yeah, heaven forbid we'd just be open to different ideas and changing our mind over time. I mean, what I would have recommended for anybody 20 years ago is vastly different from what I would say now. What I would say now is so much simpler and easier to follow. And, I like to meet people where they're at. And, if you're just dipping your toe into this whole fitness stuff, there's no way you're going to stick with some extreme, regimen when, just a couple steps in the right direction will do it.
What are some of the things that you would have recommended 20 years ago? I mean, me coming into the industry probably around 50 and reading all the bodybuilding magazines, I would have for sure said more frequent meals, for metabolists. That was one of the things I believed back then.
Yeah, that's for sure one of them. I remember the early 2000s is when I started really reading this stuff and recommending it, writing about it in the magazines. And I think at that time, we were kind of on the tail end of the functional training craze and Swiss balls. And I remember, West Side Barbell was a big thing. And I got hooked into that really hard. I was really I thought everybody should train with a barbell all the time. That was all you ever needed. Just get your squat up, your deadlift up, and, everything else will fall into place. And I think there's still a lot of merit to that, and it's a very efficient way to do it. But I would say that exercise is very specific to the individual. They have to find something that they're going to, enjoy and be willing to do on a regular basis. B, fits their body. You can't just blanket prescribe something like barbell training to everybody, despite what some of the starting strength guys, for instance, might say. So yeah, people have to find what works for them and what they can commit to and what suits their body. And that changes over time. What worked for me, I was a heavy squatter in my mid-20s up to my mid-30s, and now I can't bear the thought of that anymore. My body, my spine can't handle it. So it doesn't mean I don't train legs hard. I just find exercises that allow me to train legs hard in a different way.
I've said a few times, I love pendulum squat machines, and that's allowed me to squat heavy and hard. And I used to love barbell squatting, and one of my knees doesn't love it. And then low bar over my shoulders, my left shoulder will no longer get me in that position. It's just a part of being an aging lifter. And I don't necessarily think it was bad programming. I think there was some stuff. I probably low bar squatted too often because I was good at it, right? But, and that probably has something to do with my shoulder does not like it anymore. All right, so opposite extreme, 'cause you wrote a popular article for WebMD. No, seriously, 1 or 2 workouts a week is all you need. What's going on here?
Oh man, I wish you told me this before. I would have brushed up on it. Yeah, I
Okay.
think that was basically about weekend warriors, and they found that if you just get a certain number of minutes of exercise in during the week, it doesn't matter how you spread it out. That's what really counts. And yeah, I mean, I think the American guidelines on physical activity are like 150 minutes a week of moderate activity, which when you break it down is like a little more than 20 minutes every day. It's not hard to do. And if you can't do it every day and you only have the weekends when you're free to get your exercise in, that's okay. It's not ideal, but it's enough.
I think it comes with an understanding that, I mean, I heard Dr. John Berardi tell this story, and so I'll try to preface this. And he was sitting down with a friend, and that friend knew who John was and his educational background, and it said to John, "Hey, I know exactly how to, get in shape and lose the weight." And the guy, I think, had weight on, and he wasn't being active at all. So John sort of probed a little bit, and the guy would just talk about how you just would brute force. You need a certain amount of time. You'd have to work out really, really hard, and it's the skill that a lot of us learned as young people, right? I remember this well, and I think that too many people get older, life gets busy to get away from the habit of exercise, and they believe that in order to be able to get back in shape, they have to do it the old way, which is the brute force, high volume, lots of hours, maybe it's a bunch of running, a bit more intense dieting. And because they believe in this false dichotomy about, what you're supposed to do if you're working out, then they don't understand the middle ground. And the middle ground actually works much better, I think. I'm going to have Jason Brown on soon, and he's been a big advocate of, he's a dad, he's a busy business person, and he wants to minimize the amount of time he's actually in the gym working out, and he wants to stay strong and healthy. It's not about 5-6 days a week of 2-hour workouts.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
any depth? Want to add depth to that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what we're saying, just meeting people where they're at. You've got to look at, people as individuals and not just a cohort. And yeah, I mean, you might have guys out there. I know, Brian Cron, I think is a trainer that we both know. Like he specializes adding muscle to guys who are, over 50. Like that's a very niche market. But most guys don't really care about getting more jacked over the age of 50. They want to stay leaner and just stay healthier. But see, you can't, just lump it in and say, well, guys who are over 50, they have these goals and I'm just going to train to them. Yeah, you have to talk to people as individuals. And I think the worst thing you can do is presume that a person can handle this or wants to do that when that's what worked for you.
And I think we have a maturing community of people who are gravitating towards these more nuanced messages. Another guest coming up right away is Joel Jameson, and I've seen Joel digging into research, and Joel's even talking about how there's some data, and I'll get Joel to go into this one, about how lifting like weights past a certain point, and it's not even that high, actually may have net negative implications for longevity. So Joel has been big on increasing his cardiovascular work, emphasis on VO2 max type stuff.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've wondered about that too. I think there is kind of a pushback these days on, this just idea of getting jacked. Like, on the one hand, you've got people who are fans of The Rock, and they think that being muscular is the epitome of masculinity, and it's this aesthetic that's you aspire to. But there are serious, pragmatic side effects of getting that big. Not that most of us are going to get anywhere near The Rock's dimensions anyway, but yeah, I mean, it's more weight to carry around and more strain on your heart and your cardiovascular system, your lungs, and that's something to consider as you get older. And yeah, it's hard to glamorize cardio and sell that in the same way that people do, lifting weights and building muscle. At the same time, I think we're seeing this kind of renaissance now. You're talking about trends. as far as bodybuilding, when you and I were coming up, it was kind of, there was the bodybuilding magazines, there were machine workouts, and it was, getting a pump. That was that was all fitness was for most people. And then that was demonized by the functional training craze. And, West Side, I think it was all about just focused on strength and movement patterns over muscles. And now we're seeing, machines were no good. Now we're seeing a lot of the old bodybuilding ideas come back, and a lot of new research is showing that those methods really work very well. So, yeah, I don't know what I'm saying. I guess it's just there's always going to be opposing ideologies, and you have to kind of find a balance between the two.
I actually love the point you're making, because I think there's some truth in that. A lot of truth in that is the things that work tend to stand the test of time. And I've always had the attitude with Arnold and his contemporaries, I think they were actually pretty good at tactically figuring out effective ways to build muscle. I think they were just good at it. And I'll use the example of, the rep ranges. We used to believe, even when I entered the industry, that 1 to 5 reps roughly was for strength building. And then like 7, 8 to 12 was, for muscle mass. No one ever did 6 reps. So it was never a thing. And then 15 and above was for muscular endurance, and that was pretty much cardio. And then, of course, now we've got great research, Brad Schoenfeld, who's also coming on soon, and we're probably going to talk about this, where you can build muscle mass at any rep range, as long as you're probably lifting with at least 30% of your 1 rep max. It's got to be heavy enough to get to near failure. And that's the second thing, is you have to be able to get within, probably the research says, about 5 reps of failure. Most people are terrible at knowing how close they really are. So practical 1 to 2 reps of failure. But when you get into really low rep range, and I've seen some stuff that kind of argues this point, and I don't agree with it, especially a lot of exercises. If you're in that 5 to 6 rep range with a fair number of exercises to near failure, that's extremely heavy weight, probably not practical for, beginners, certainly. And I just don't think it's going to feel great on joints, especially if you're doing a lot of it. And you also need to add more sets and more timed workouts to increase the amount of tension you probably need to actually optimally grow. Now, have you ever done a set of 20 barbell squats?
Absolutely.
To near failure, how'd that feel?
Horrendous.
Horrible shit, right? So we now also know, research, that it's actually the higher rep stuff that causes more neurological fatigue than even the lower rep stuff, right? And experientially, I can agree with that stuff. Now, again, sitting in a leg press and doing 20 reps, I think it's actually good to, actually experience that sort of thing. I wouldn't recommend to anybody the 20 sets of squats. And then you could probably do reps of 20. Like the RP guys are really great for this stuff, like laterals, curls, etc. It's a little more time consuming, burns the muscle. But when it really comes down to it, I think the stuff that the Arnold crowd figured out was that classic 8 to 12 rep range just fucking worked. It was practical. It was a good weight to take to near failure reliably. You get into higher rep stuff, and it's harder to actually kind of really get close or be sure where you are. So the stuff that they anecdotally figured out, I think practically works, and it's supported by the evidence.
Yeah, I think that absolutely does work. I think you can zoom in on that a little bit more. I've been actually lowering my reps over time, which they say, for years, the idea was don't do that because, heavier weights will be harder on your joints. And as you get older, you don't want to, burden them anymore. But there's so much nuance to this. How are you performing like sets of 5 to 8 if that's what you choose to do? Like I do a 2-second negative on pretty much every rep of every exercise. Like that's a lot of control, way more than most people put into a rep. And I'm not swinging the weight on the way up. And, so it's not like I'm lifting as much as I possibly can for 5 to 8 reps. I'm lifting as much as I possibly can for 5 to 8 reps with the utmost, attention to technique and detail. So when you consider it like that, I'm not using a back-breaking amount of load for 5 to 8. It's just the load I can control in that range. And then I'm not dealing with the fatigue effects of going with much higher reps. So there's so much nuance to how we do this stuff. It's hard to give, again, blanket recommendations. But yeah, I do think that kind of moderate system that the Arnold and those guys figured out 60 odd years ago, it still works really, really well. The one thing I would say that those guys, I think, were a little bit overly ambitious about was the volume. I don't think anybody needs to do Arnold's workout of 30 odd sets, per body part.
We also have to factor in that we are still, anytime someone whips out names like Arnold, Ronnie Coleman, Mike Mentzer, whatever, the Dorian Yates, these are the genetic elite. And at the various stages of their careers, they were also probably on the cutting edge of the anabolics they were using.
Absolutely. Another thing that's just worth talking about for a second is, those guys in the old days and a lot of the power lifters who love the barbell, I think that, you got to remember that's all that they had. For legs for a long time, you had to learn how to squat. Nowadays we have so many other machines. You mentioned the pendulum squat before. There's hack squats, there's leg presses, leg extensions, and all sort of variations on those. We're not so limited by these tools as we were. So if you have, pre-existing, back injuries or knee problems or whatever, and these things are available to you, make use of them. Get around injuries. You don't have to be so hardcore and feel like you got to, shove a square peg into a round hole. There's ways you can train that shouldn't, and it won't aggravate your back, your knees, your other problems. And I think it's what I'm also learning from myself is it's easier to make progress on those exercises. They're not as coordinated. They're more stable. You can keep adding load over time. And that's really how you build muscle. Whereas it's very hard if you've been training for 10 or plus years to add like another 5 or 10 pounds to your 1RM squat. But you can keep going up in the 5 to 8 rep range, 2.5 to 5 pounds in every couple of weeks on leg extensions, leg press, etc., for a very long time. And I think if you want to talk about making progress for a long time, building muscle over a long time, that's how you have to start thinking.
And to your point, so funny, I'll sometimes sound like I think that everything needs to be done in an 8 to 12 rep range. When I'm using a pendulum squat, I actually like 5 to 6 reps. So, and I think you said there, the stability aspect can make something like that work really well. I'm not convinced I like the idea of a 5 rep max on a leg press, just to the position I think it puts you in and the load you can put on it. I think practically, I'm not convinced that's going to work very well. But pendulum squat works great in that kind of rep range. And, you take it to near failure. It's pretty heavy, but again, you build up the tolerance and the skill of that over time. But I just think the stability of the machine and the path works really well for that.
Yeah, and let's also just talk about what a 5 rep max is. I mean, do we have to go to the end? I think that a lot of the research is showing now we don't have to go to failure. So maybe you do 5 reps, but you really had 6 or 7 in you. That's going to work better for most people more of the time than going right up against the edge of that, 5 rep max of what you can lift. Think about leaving 1 or 2 in the tank. It takes a lot of pressure off you mentally when you train. I could say that's the first thing you'll notice. You don't feel like you have to, beat the logbook and drive yourself to the, over the edge. And it's easier on your joints and your muscles too. It reduces the risk of injury. There's a lot of wisdom in just holding back a little bit, but it takes, experience to know what the difference is, how much to hold back, to, what the difference is between, leaving 1 or 2 in the tank and just going way short of failure.
Yep. And I think most people, certainly beginners and intermediates, are not amazing at knowing where failure is. And if I'm going to take something to failure, I mean, I've never taken a pendulum squat to failure. I've never gotten buried at the bottom of it. Right? I've got buried under the bottom of heavy squats before. We've all done that in our younger days. But
Rite of passage.
I think shoulder laterals, curls, chest, shoulder press machines, those things all work really, really well to take a set, at the end of your pyramid to pretty damn close to failure. And I think that's a good experience to know how that feels.
Yeah, totally.
All right. How do you get tired? Or how do you not get tired, of retelling the basics of fitness and nutrition, how long you've been writing about these things, about nutrition, and every variation and iteration, and trying to find some sort of fresh way to write the same article?
That's a good question. I think for me, I can't speak for all writers, but I'm super passionate about this stuff. If I wasn't a writer, I'd probably be trying to hack it as a trainer. I think you and I are like that. We love this stuff. We live and breathe it. We're always experimenting in ourselves. So I think for me, the challenge is, well, for one thing, it's never really gets that boring for me because I do love it so much. But I think to kind of keep it interesting, I always try to figure out how can I say this more concisely, more simply, in a shorter way. Like that's the challenge as you get more advanced as a writer and you're dealing with the same material over and over again. Can I explain how to set up a diet in fewer words and cut to the quick of it a little, sooner than I did maybe 5 years ago when I wrote about this thing the last time. I think, and that's just a good kind of guideline for any content creator today is, how concise and quick can we do this stuff? Because there's just so much out there. And if you don't grab people right away and give them a sense of value, you're going to lose them.
And you've always got new people coming on board, finding fitness at all ages anyway, right? I mean, who's going back through the archives and necessarily looking for 5, 10, 15-year-old articles?
Yeah, unless they're well SEO'd, which anything that old wouldn't be, you're not going to. And And that's a whole other discussion. We could just talk real quick about how to be seen online. I think one thing, you're seeing this a lot now, one thing that can help people get their content out there is think about the kind of questions that people have about a topic and then try to answer those as quickly as you can in your writing. So, if I'm writing about, No Bull shoes, for instance, the company I'm consulting for now, people want to know about the No Bull Outwork, which is their big training shoe. That's their flagship product. The subhead for the headline, for the article is, what is the No Bull outwork? What is it? And then I answer, well, it's a training shoe that's 4 millimeter drop, and it's very stable for lifting, it's very durable, et cetera, et cetera. And then you just kind of go down the list. What are all the questions that organically pop into your mind when you think of a topic, and how would you answer those for people? That's a good way to get started. And consider that people are doing a lot of voice search now when they Google stuff. They'll just speak the question into their phone, and that's how it'll type out and into Google. So, think in terms of those kind of questions and how you can best answer them.
I think I've never used this, but I understand Google Analytics is pretty good at knowing is that something you use to figure out what are people searching for? Or where do you find
Yeah, I don't personally. I deal with SEO professionals who can, kind of consolidate all that for me.
All right. This makes me think of a book I really like. So this is again for more the fitness professional, but if the enthusiast is interested, author named Nicholas Cole, and he's got a book called The Art and Business of Online Writing. And he says stuff that's very similar to what you said, is figure out what questions people are answering and go and answer those questions.
Yeah. And yeah, I think try to, another mistake a lot of writers make is they have a big flowery preamble to their articles. They'll have, 3 or 4 paragraphs of introduction with, old cliched bad jokes that, you got to kind of dispense with that these days. You kind of, couple sentences, set up what you're going to be talking about, and then just right to the meat of it. The people don't have the patience for that, and nor should they, because I think a lot of writers, especially when you're new to this game, they have a tendency to be verbose and pretentious, and just when they should be focusing on how do I communicate this clearly and quickly.
Well, it makes me think of exercise demo videos as well. A while back, I filmed a video library. And one of my biggest frustrations, and I think any user, whether you're a coach or not, big frustration, you're searching for, hey, how do I do this exercise? The first few things come up and someone's talking for 3 minutes. Listen, there's no information that takes 3 minutes to set up that's essential to the demonstration execution of a video. I want to see what's going on. Something very quick. So I basically film this library, and if anybody wants it, just message me. I will literally send you the library, or it's just on my YouTube channel if you want it. And I want to get right to the exercise. I want it to be quick and dirty. And the other problem is you might watch 3 minutes of this fucking video, and then all of a sudden you realize that the version that they're teaching, I don't agree with the way that they're even teaching it. I don't like using right, wrong, because I think there's different ideas about stuff. But, maybe I always like making fun of the Arnold press, right? I think there's a dumb fuck version and a useful version. And the dumb fuck one, for the people only on audio, I've got to try to describe this as they do it. You would take your elbows forward with weight to your hands, and you would just lateral without upward momentum and then press from a wide position. That's stupid, right? Because the direction of the force acting on you is vertical. So this lateral motion is, you're only going to be using lighter weight than you should be able to press. So I want a constant upward motion. I want a corkscrewing motion the whole way. Now, there's also people, if you've heard me say this before, I apologize. And I've heard people say that Arnold press is a stupid exercise for hypertrophy. I've heard people like Lee Priest. There's a famous video about Lee Priest making fun of it. Well, guess what? For someone who has pissed off shoulders, and anybody who's trained any population that's over 40, you're dealing with people whose shoulders don't love everything. If you put your elbows up in the widest possible position, you press, that doesn't feel great. It doesn't feel great for me. But if you actually do, why does landmine pressing work so well? Because your humerus is adducted to the midline of your body, and tucked, for those who are not used to the word adducted, and you press, and guess what? That's like super hypoallergenic on the shoulder. Like I don't know if I've ever seen a shoulder that is bothered by a landmine press. So if you start an Arnold press in that position and then you gradually rotate outward, usually it feels fine. Guess what? You're putting tension on muscle. And if the difference between getting someone to be able to train an overhead movement is whether or not they're in pain and can do it, guess what? The version that doesn't put them in pain, even if it's not like biomechanically optimal, is still really good for muscle growth. So forgive my rant.
No, those are all great points. And I think you just you started to write a little shoulder training article there, Andrew. I don't think you even realized it, but these are the kind of questions that I would want to ask and then answer if I was writing about the landmine shoulder press, which is something I have written about many times. And yeah, why does it work? How do I do it right? When would this be an appropriate exercise? Who would benefit from this? Think outside the box, not just, who you train yourself or what you would do in your own training, but, how can somebody's 75-year-old grandmother benefit from something like that?
Now, what do you say to the person who wants to do this, but thinks it's all been said before?
I mean, there isn't anything really new under the sun. There's no reinventing the wheel. But like I said before, you can always say things a little more simply, a little more clearly, and for in a different voice, in a different tone for a different audience. You can have been a million articles about how to build muscle and lose fat. There's going to be a million more before you and I are gone. And I just think, yeah, if one article got it done, you wouldn't continue to see all these. There's no one size fits all. So, think about how you can make it your own and how you can make it more accessible.
This always makes you think of this. I reuse posts on social media fairly frequently, popular stuff. I don't write something new every single day. But you know what I get all the time? It's my favorite response. Quote, I needed this today. Because, again, it might be someone brand new. It might be someone who's been there for a while and they're having a tough day. And it was just a little hit of inspiration. And, the people who criticize the fluffier, more surface level stuff, guess what? That stuff actually does pretty well on social media. And, I respect for the people who go in depth and research-based stuff on social media. I think it's a lot of effort that can be hit or miss. And it doesn't necessarily have the extreme or sensational message and grab that the crazy shit does. But I still believe in showing up every day and if it makes a difference for one person. So what about the extreme, the crazy shit? Why do you think some people go down that path? Do you think everybody starts out as well-intentioned, but then just there's this creep of getting more and more extreme with the headlines, the titles, the content, and then it's just a slippery slope, and then next you know, they've lost their soul?
I think there's just something about human nature where it's much sexier and more interesting to go in for something extreme than it is to go in for something mundane and moderate. Why is the carnivore diet such a huge trend these last few years? Cut out all vegetables, eat nothing but meat. It's attention getting. It's very easy to explain. And it seems easy on the face of it. It seems like, well, that's my problem right there. I was eating too many vegetables. I was eating too many foods. Well, I'll just cut all that out and keep it very, very simple. I'll just eat, T-bone steaks and everything will be fine. There's just something about kind of making things super easy for people that's always going to be attractive. And I think in the case of something like that, the more shocking it is, the more I think people they get a lot of mileage out of shock value. And I think they like to tell their friends, oh, I'm doing this extreme diet that makes me better and tougher and, wilder than you are. And they like to be able to kind of show that off. It's a talking point. It's a conversation piece. It makes life more interesting rather than the correct answer, which for most people, most of the time is, well, how about you try eating, fewer of this kind of food, a little bit more of that kind of food, and just control your calories overall and find a way to stick with this new regimen every single, day, excluding a cheat meal here and there for the rest of your life. That would be the better advice. But yeah, we like extremes. Nobody picks up weights thinking I want to be, moderately healthy and fit. They pick them up initially because they want to be like The Rock, or they want to be like Arnold. They want to be ripped like this guy they saw in the magazine cover or the movie. So yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with extremism, I think, to get the ball rolling, but you've got to, come to moderation sooner rather than later if you want to be consistent and have longevity.
You mentioned the carnivore diet a couple times. So why do people initially sometimes feel better on the carnivore diet? Because I know people who initially feel better. What's going on?
It's basically just an elimination diet. You're not so much that eating the addition of more meat or red meat to your diet is having some magical effect. You're just cutting out whatever was bothering you before. If you're doing it for digestive issues, maybe there was something in bread or in dairy or whatever you were eating before that was bothering your stomach, and that's why you had a reaction to it. But it's not that, eating ribeyes now has cured that. It's just you've eliminated what the problem was. And I think, people who eat a lot of carbs or processed foods, they are on a carb roller coaster probably all day long, and their energy comes up and then it goes down. And when you eat a lot of meat and fat, that stabilizes your blood sugar. So you can avoid that to a degree. And, it's fun initially at first. It's a sexy diet. Well, yeah, a lot of guys out there, they like to eat burgers. They like to eat steak, eating a lot of meat and fat. It is highly palatable. It's satiating. It's an attractive diet at first, but I don't know anybody who's stuck with it for more than a couple weeks who didn't start to kind of feel like it was, not something they could sustain.
And that's been my experience too, is someone feels better because they removed this, they removed all this stuff. It's probably FODMAP issue somewhere in there, right? And they don't know what it was, but it went out. And I think the wise move is, okay, start bringing things back one piece at a time slowly. And then all of a sudden, if something comes in and you start having issues, well, you've actually identified the real problem, right? It's not the fact that fiber is somehow bad for you.
Yeah, and just so I don't get a lot of carnivore hate mail out there, folks, if you like carnivore and you've done it for over a year, stick with it. I mean, who am I to tell you how to eat? But for most people, most of the time, again, it's not going to be the most sustainable practice.
I don't think there's probably a lot of carnivore listeners, but let's say someone is just determined to do this. What do you tell them to watch out for, with especially like blood work or long-term implications?
Well, I want to say I did one of the very first really in-depth analysis articles on the carnivore diet, probably 7 years ago, where I talked to a guy from, you mentioned John Barari. I talked to a guy from Precision Nutrition about it. I interviewed a guy who'd been doing it for a year or so. So I got a couple different interviews and looked at a lot of the research on it. And I mean, it definitely has benefits. I think that, yeah, you have to, what I would be most concerned about, and what the guy from Precision Nutrition, I think it was Brian St. Pierre, said to me was, you've got to consider that cutting out all fiber will raise your risk of colon cancer. It's this idea that you should avoid vegetables because they have anti-nutrients in them, things that block the absorption of other nutrients. There's truth to that, but it's not like that's the dominant reaction in your body. It's not like you're eating vegetables and therefore you cannot absorb anything else ever again. It's a defense mechanism these plants have, but you can get around it. And I think the metaphor that he used, the analogy, which I thought was spot on, was he said, lobsters have shells. They have claws and they have shells to protect them. That doesn't mean you can't eat a lobster. If you really want to, you can still catch it and boil it and crack the shell and, get to the meat inside. So defense mechanisms, they have a purpose and they can be effective to a degree, but that doesn't mean you can't overcome them.
And oftentimes the defense mechanism is to keep bugs from eating them. And bugs, as far as like mass, because poison, any sort of toxin is in the dose, the amount that would be effective at fending off bugs would be so inconsequential to a human as to not be an issue, right? And so I agree with you. I think that a lot of the people who are fear-mongering about vegetables and fiber are grossly overstating the problems with things like anti-nutrients.
100%.
All right, this has been fantastic. People can find you at Sean Hyson. I love the people who have their full name, their first and last name on Instagram. I am so jealous. I can't get mine. This comes up all the time. Are there any other resources you want to direct people to? Obviously, you're now with Red Bull. Or sorry, not Red Bull, No Bull. Whoops.
That'd be cool too. Yeah, I mean, I'm not super active on social, but I will respond if you message me on Instagram at Sean Hyson, as you said. I have a website. It hasn't been updated in a long time. I'm not hard to find, though. I will respond to every message in time. If you have training questions or writing questions, always happy to help people out.
Oh, and I really want to bring me on here. I mean, hey, it's face-to-face time, but I wanted people to also, because still a lot of coaches listening. I know someone got into some coaching type stuff, but I wanted people to know kind of someone who's been a major influence. You've been an incredible resource, but also really important in the career development of lots of other people. Your good friend and my friend, Jeb Stewart Johnston, who I'm going to bring on in the not too distant future. He's how we got connected through everything. And I know you've had a close relationship with a lot of other people who have gone on to do great things in the industry, and you've created opportunities for those people. So it's appreciated.
Yeah, well, thank you, Andrew. It's not that purely out of the goodness of my heart that I connect with you and some of these other people. You guys have a lot of good information and perspective to offer. And, I'm a lifelong learner and I love getting a chance to work with these guys. I mean, everything that I've ever learned that has affected my health and training positively has come out of conversations with guys like you. So thanks for blazing the trail for us.
And I'll give everybody a little peek behind the curtain on this stuff, how this happens. So I've been referred to and asked to write for a lot of different publications. And I mean, you and I followed each other and, mutual friends, what have you. We hadn't interacted much more than like little snippets, but, Onnit was on my radar. It was a brand that I really respected, and it was a goal of mine to hopefully write for them. So I reached out to you, a little nervous that you might politely decline. And I asked, and I think I said something to the effect that one of my goals was I aspired to write for Onnit, and I wanted to approach it in such a way that I would be of service, and I didn't need a regular writing gig and pay or what have you. I saw it as a valuable opportunity. And you turned around, you wanted to jump on a call, and you said to me that I was overqualified to write on it. So there was the response I was getting, but guess what? We immediately made something work, and it was actually a fun article. So if anybody's interested, it's actually a little bit more niche. It's on the Larson press, which is a feet up bench press, and it's sort of the pros and cons. And I actually had a lot of fun writing that article because I had to do a deep dive. We got into the, Adrian Larson, the guy behind it, his history and why he benched this way. He's a bench only powerlifter because he was born with dislocated hips and clubbed feet. So it was an innovation out of necessity that sort of caught on. The guy's bench pressed a motorcycle as sort of a stunt, a PR stunt for charity, I think. So it was actually a fun piece. So if anybody's interested in it, message me. It's linked on my website, but I'll send it to you personally. And but yeah, that's how that opportunity came to be.
Yeah, and I guess just to shed some light on that for people who don't know, that's an example of capitalizing on SEO key terms. If you want to get more eyeballs in your content, it's really important to hire somebody who's into SEO, so you don't have to do it yourself, ideally, but figure out what people are searching for in fitness that gets a lot of traffic but doesn't get a lot of competition. So something like that, the Larson press was a really good example. Here was a term that is very, very niche and not known to most people, but people who are interested in getting their bench press up and using more outside the box techniques to do it are going to Google things like Larson press. And, of course, because it is so niche, there isn't a lot of great competition. There's not a lot of other articles out there on it. So, find something like that you can then do a deep dive on and own the space on something like a Larson press. And you'll be surprised how much traffic, comes knocking at your door.
And you never know what that comes out of it, because I was able to get Dave Tate, which is the first time I've ever interacted. Dave's iconic as a quote because you wanted some quotes from some legacy powerlifting coaches. And then I got to meet Dave several months later at Swiss, and having that brief interaction was the doorway into chatting with him. And then he invited me to write for Elite FTS, which turned into an appearance on Table Talk. So you never know what could happen. And I'm a big believer. Like, I find a lot of people ask for things that are out of their depth, but if you put in the hard work and you can back it up, and then asking and creating opportunities, especially if you go about it in the way that frames it as it's going to help the other person. Far too many people, I mean, as an editor for as long as you've been, how many people are in your DMs going, how do I get featured in Muscle and Fitness, right? How do I get featured? And what happens there? You're like, no, because they're in it for themselves.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think if you're trying to break into magazines or any other, like a website, any other media kind of outlet now as a writer, it's best to do it by referral. Find somebody that has already had success there and, get in with them rather than just, kind of cold calling or emailing somebody out of the blue. It's editors like to work with people they know and trust.
I'm a big believer in making sure you take care of your editors, make their job easy. So Sean, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you again. And everybody, go follow Sean. He's not as active on social media as some of the other guests, but, it's still great that you guys know he exists out in the space, and maybe go buy a pair of Noble. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it.